Right. Welcome to today's meeting. I've got the usual. So this is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. The alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone. If we start with substitutes.
Chair, we don't have any substitutes with us this evening, but we have had a number of apologies. I think you've got a list somewhere if you want to just mention who's sent their apologies for tonight's meeting.
Thank you. We have apologies from Councillor Alan Amos, Roger Knight from St Peter's Parish, John Renshaw also from St Peter's Parish, Dawn Merriman from Warndon Parish, and Ray Needham, our independent co-opted member. I believe we have no items of public participation. Right. So if we just go through the minutes, and obviously I wasn't chair then, so if I should trust your judgment. So if we could go through page 1, page 2, page 3. And can I take those as all agreed? Right, so now we're on to agenda item 5, and that's the annual report of the Standards Committee. And I think that's over to Sean.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Yes, the Standards Committee is charged with annually reporting back to work programme undertaking in the previous municipal year as part of our assurance mechanism to demonstrate so the annual report that's set out attached describes the function of previous years. The function of the committee is to consider rise and to support the monitoring officer in work that the Standards Committee and the monitoring officer is able to do is subject to the constraints and the terms of the legislation that's set out nationally, particularly the Localism Act. The report notes who the to the complaints which were considered under the Members of Code during the previous year. Members of this committee will be aware that complaints privacy, unless a complaint is upheld. Therefore, for the purposes of this nevertheless, the summary gives a flavour of where that under the person to assess complaints. Chair and Vice Chair. The report notes that of the complaints received, 5 were concluded as no action. Resolved informally. 1 instance, assessment process one instance, having considered the report then goes on to reflect on the government and social care ombudsman, their complaints to do with council services. The report notes that during the previous municipal year, there were no reports from the local government. I've just crossed my wires. In terms of the previous municipal year, there were no complaints, but the activity that the committee was considering, the problem with looking back during the last work programme, was considering the year before. So the committee did have some work to do in the before that. There'd been quite a number against the council. So just to be absolutely clear, because this comes up later on the agenda, in the municipal year that we've just finished, before that there were 5 planning matters. 2 of them were upheld. And as part of the function of the Standards Committee, both in the public session and in the exempt session, members of the committee scrutinised the process that had led to those. There was some financial. Finally, there's the standing item about declarations of gifts and hospitality. We do have our registers, we do have our particular activity. Then more substantively, the committee looked at the code of conduct for members. Members of the committee will be aware that for some time, Worcestershire-wide code of conduct, which all the districts and the county. During the previous year, the committee considered a new model code being offered by the Government Association. Debated the merits of moving to that template, staying with the Worcestershire. Good discussion about that. And there was several reasons for the Local Government Association to produce a new model. One was simply it was overdue a review, but another reason felt that public discourse for and against councillors and political discourse had become more sort of charged and potentially unpleasant with social media and so forth. They wanted to make sure that they had established really clearly what the principle of respect meant. Government code of conduct for members, both in terms of expectations that members should be respectful, but also protection for members. They were subject themselves to abuse or threats. Model code makes it clear that there is a line for councillors to tolerate. They can disconnect such individuals in the community without themselves being in breach. So that was a helpful point that the LGA was. So in any event, the model code was debated by the Standards Committee. Support was given from this committee, the other ones in the district and county, to consider moving to the LGA's new code. Finally, there was refresher training offered on standards and those members. I'd like to conclude that that's a summary of the work of the previous year, unless you have any questions.
I would just like to add, obviously I've succeeded Councillor Andy Roberts, chair of the committee. So I'm new to this role, but I would like to thank him for his diligence and commitment to ensuring that standard of conduct is maintained within the council. and I'm pleased that he will be my vice chair for this year. I would also like to thank fellow committee members, co-opted members and officers for their contribution during the past year. Yes, do we have any questions or comments on the report? Thank you. Next, we have the update report from the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, sorry, members, I started to confuse myself with the previous item. So the important thing to note on this report is that Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman has no complaints upheld against the council. There are no complaints system for this period that we're aware of. There are no complaints upheld against the council. The Ombudsman's annual report, which is normally published at the end of June, has been slightly delayed, and they've written to us to let us know that, due at the end of July. But anticipating that this was on the agenda tonight, we went back to the Ombudsman's office to cross-check our records with theirs, and they've confirmed that there are no upheld complaints, that they will be reported. So that's obviously a significant improvement on the year before. And the reason I was choosing my words carefully there was for a period of time, because of COVID and the backlog of work that the local government councils couldn't be clear whether there was information that was going to come through, which is effectively awaiting triage. But we're now clear that there aren't any complaints in the backlog. Good news.
That is positive news. Do we have any questions or comments? If we move to agenda item 7, and here we've got complaints made under the Members' Code of Conduct.
Thank you, Chair. This is a standing item of business for the Standards Committee to look back in the period since the committee last, a number of complaints received under the members, their progression. So since the last meeting of the committee in November, 3 complaints have been received. As previously noted, the process requires that the monitoring consults with an independent to each complaint to act as a check and balance on the process. The outcome of the complaints following assessment with the independent person, that one complaint has been resolved under informal action. Also should be noted, referred to in the previous item, that one way to a hearing function of procedure we follow, where it may be there is a case that there is a potential breach. Those cases, that's referred to a subcommittee of this consider that case carefully, that there had been no breach. Again, Chair, that's all I have to report on this.
Okay, Sian, thank you. And I think that's very positive. That's really good. But do we have any questions or comments?
I think the one thing I was going to ask is, with 2 complaints under assessment, what sort of timescale are we looking at for resolution on those?
They will be resolved very rapidly within.
Thank you. Further questions? Okay, on to agenda item 8. This is regarding the Members' Code of Conduct. Thank you.
So, as referred to previously, the committee does have the opportunity to recommend to full council that we move to the Local Government Associations. But what the monitoring officers in Worcestershire are proposing, one is adopted, which is the Local Government Associations Model Code, with a few amendments to reflect existing principles that we've established under our... Add some points of clarification about a group of monitoring officers based on the type of complaints we have. So, for example, third, we've given a home to the definition of bullying. Phrase in the code that describes bullying, we've linked that to the ACAS definition of bullying to give that a degree of objectivity. We've also enhanced the provision requiring that a councillor doesn't breach the Equality Act. We've enhanced that to clarify that a councillor shouldn't do something that put the council in its equality, where that as a public body, enhanced duty. So we considered that that language was a bit narrow. Clear that as ambassadors for the council, shouldn't put the council said to have breached. Shall I continue to sort of highlight the changes, or shall I do questions? Or what I suppose what I would say is that hopefully members would agree that those that are familiar that the changes from the existing code to the LGO code are themselves fairly modest. When we spoke before 12 months ago, quite marginal case for even changing in the first place, but we felt that if we did move to the model code, we could at least keep pace with the rest of the sector, and if the LGO guidance on specific, at least we'd all be referring to the same document in the same.
Thanks, Chair. I just from share a little experience, it seems to me that we've got into a bit of a loop here where the county doesn't want to approve this thing without all the districts approving it, and the districts don't want to do it until the county does it, which is a bit daft. And the other thing is, one for officers to learn is not but when these things go to districts, other districts, if you say this is what is recommended in line with what you requested, it's likely to be approved. But councillors are such that if you say this is what officers recommend you do, they're likely to challenge it. And I think that's what's happened. And it's so marginal. It's so marginal. And it's all, I mean, are we going to be nice to one another when we're arguing? Well, of course we are, aren't we? But, you know, but if we aren't, we can be forgiven under this code. So, I mean, if you're going to go through them, great. But I'd certainly recommend that we accept it. Thank you.
And I think also, as you know, that the other districts apart from Redditch have approved the changes. So it's just us. There are some changes that Redditch have specified. We can take a view if but yeah, but does anyone have anything they'd like to, or is everyone happy?
I've got a couple of questions and some comments. I thought to ask the questions first, if that's okay. Question number one from myself is, what is an example of a minor change that would be made by a monitoring officer to the code of conduct? And pardon me if that is simply a spelling error being corrected, it's minor as that, but it might be something more than that. So could you tell me what an example of that would be?
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. I think that's an extremely important question. Minor would mean, and indeed I'd be very happy to clarify this if it would benefit from clarification, minor should always be taken to mean a grammatical change or a reference to updated legislation, nothing that could require a policy decision. Exactly the same rule to any change. Anything that is an expression must come. It would be helpful to clarify that in the document then, so that we're all working universally to the same. But that's, you have my assurance that that's how that is applied in practice. I don't have, in terms of schema delegation, I don't have authority to make any changes. Literally just updating legislation or correcting grammatical.
Thank you. I thought that was the case, just wanted to clarify. And my second question, Well, page 11.3 states that the monitoring officer may state on the register that the councillor has an interest, the details of which are withheld. The question is, what is an example of a so-called sensitive interest?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, this is interesting, and this again comes from legislation. So what's ported into the code is the text from the legislation. It actually came about relating to employment interests in respect of laboratory work, and the councillors in that part of the country, the interest that was being declared related to employment in laboratory work, where those laboratories could have been the target of action from protest groups. That was the context in which that amendment made its way into the legislation. If your course of employment could attract a degree of scrutiny that was welcome, that principle is expected to be interpreted. It may well be that if employment was in security services, for example. So it comes from the legislation. Again, it's not an area where a monitoring officer is able to exercise discretion. It is to be interpreted very narrowly, and it effectively relates to threats, personal security.
Thank you. Yeah, before I come to the pre-written comment, I'd make a suggestion that an example could be given to explain what a sensitive interest is, because otherwise you're going to get people like me ask the same question. And also, I think if you were a member of the public looking in, you could possibly argue that a sensitive interest could be used as a blanket term to hide interests that councillors have that they just don't want the public to know about. So rather, it would nip it in the bud if an example could be given of a sensitive interest so that people from without wouldn't wonder what a sensitive interest is. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's helpful. I'm just thinking actually in terms of how it appears on our website, which is the place where people go to look at it. Julian, whether we have a little footnote on there that explains what the definition is on the website. Probably be the best place to put it. On the website, I think.
Yeah, yes, we do obviously record this information on the website, and I can certainly see whether we can add some sort of extra information.
Thank you. Yeah, almost done. Final comments. Yeah, I just wanted to thank the City Council for scheduling this standards meeting to occur on the day that the Prime Minister has resigned. I thought fantastic scheduling. I'd also like to direct the committee's attention to page 10 of the Code of Conduct that we're discussing this evening, which is titled Appendix A, the 10 Principles of Public Life. I can count at least 9 principles that the outgoing Prime Minister has frequently ignored. For example, duty to uphold the law, leadership and accountability. And I believe it's absurd that while we as local government representatives have been following the 10 principles of public life, the former Prime Minister has been free to do whatever he wants. His behaviour has been... I'm almost finished. I'm almost finished, Councillor.
I think, yeah.
Point. I'm sure that's a point of order.
I think, Councillor Lawrence, thank you.
Thank
But
you.
I
I've been there a
because
decade.
it's
I've never had to do that.
parliamentary-
So
yeah.
can I finish?
But I think it's a parliamentary point. If you want to bring it back to the city, you may, but
Integrity is an abuse of the English language. They were happy to swap Prime Minister who didn't care about the Nolan principles or the people he was meant to serve. If anyone on this committee would like to respond to what I've just said, I'd like to refer them to page 4 of the Code of Conduct, which highlights the need to engage in public debate with other councillors in a robust but civil manner. Thank you.
This committee's jurisdiction relates to ethical standards, Worcester City Council. It's always the discretion of the chair to hear views and move us on when we've considered that we've debated the item.
I think, Councillor, thank you very much for your comments, and I think today has been an extraordinary day by many means, but I think we do need to move back to Worcester City. But does any...
Yeah, I'd like to say that I think it is relevant to look at the leadership of the country, see that we are supposedly trying to be, hope we are not, no we are not, and I think it is worth saying. Thank you
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a question really for the monitoring officer. I assume we'll be kept up to date with any changes in case law which have an impact upon the code of conduct, because one of the things that I didn't realise until I was chair of standards and then vice chair was that councillors are given enhanced protection for freedom of speech as councillors, and that was established in a case law, wasn't it, by decision. But obviously there is sometimes a contradiction between our freedom of speech under the Human Rights Act, or whatever we'll succeed it when that's got rid of, and the Equality Act, because as you quite rightly say, we have got the right as councillors, and it's been established in case law, to say things in the chamber which perhaps we might not be able to say outside the chamber, but at the same time we have also got to follow the Equality Act, and obviously the balance between those two things, our freedom of speech and what is protected under the Equality Act, is in flux. It's continuously being updated and changed. And there was a case, wasn't there, last week, where someone had made a comment about gender reassignment, and it went to an industrial tribunal, and her freedom of speech, whilst she expressed views that other people might not agree with, I might not have agreed, were actually protected, you see. And I'm just mindful, I think we need to be kept up to date as councillors where that line is, because there is always a balance between freedom of speech and obviously the protection of minorities, etc. So I just want to be assured that we will be kept up to date with any relevant changes which might impact on the code of conduct.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, absolutely, I would want to give you that assurance. The interface between freedom of speech and other rights is really interesting, and in the context of public discourse, it is a really important issue for us to keep our eye on. It would also be, I think some councillors know, it would also be helpful to offer training on the Equality Act generally to councillors. It's something we plan to do for staff, and I know a number of councillors, they would be interested too. It's important to be able to debate things. That's exactly what councillors are appointed to do, and it's important that they feel they have freedom to do that. And I think that what the case law is trying to do is balance those rights. Behaviour doesn't become hostile and intimidating. So yes, absolutely, I will keep you up to date, and we will pick it up in training.
Thank you, Chair. Just come back to the point I made to yourself before the meeting started. We are wasting our time talking about standards if we're not applying the standards in our own meetings. So, you know, I spent half an hour writing a comment on this, and I was interrupted, and yet we're talking about, you know, engaging in respectful debate. So can we please follow what we're spending our evenings deciding upon? Otherwise, we are wasting our time.
I think, Councillor Lawrence, thank you, but I think we must appreciate this is a Worcester. We must. I know it's an extraordinary day, and I myself have much I would like to comment on, but I won't. And as Chair of Standards, I think we need to keep it. We'll ensure people aren't. I think we do have a particular role to play as a standards. We need to apply them when we need.
Do you think, as a member of the Standards Board, individuals, we need to take a broad view and leave our politics behind so that we can make a fair judgment on these matters that have been so important.
Yeah, while we're here, we just need to focus
Common sense.
on.
Chair, thanks. I kind of take the view that if we are going to use, I mean, today and yesterday were particularly unique examples of politics in the raw, but we can use things as examples of what we're trying to discuss and advance an argument for, without it becoming an overt attempt to simply take us down a road where we're, as a committee, not really supposed to be. You know, there's no particular reason, in my view, why we can't use examples of what might be, you know, standards in public life on a national basis to simply demonstrate what we're looking to communicate to each other in the meeting. But we're in danger otherwise of simply just going beyond that into an overtly political thing that I think is wholly inappropriate for this committee. So I think the balance has to be quite clear. You know, there's an appropriate length down that road we can go without it becoming something that is not for this committee, in my view.
Thank you, yes. And I think obviously we can link to examples, I think, or formal reports or actual, you know, items, day reports. But we need to.
I cannot believe that councillors in a standards committee are suggesting that we can't comment on the standards of national government. You know, if we can't talk about it now in this committee, when can we talk about it? I mean, I lead by example in acting in a way that secures public confidence. And yet, for the past 2.5 years, we've seen national officials not doing that. So to try and sidestep it.
I think we need to close it there. But I think, Councillor Lawson, thank you for your comments.
I'm glad these things are being broadcast.
But you know, it is a Worcester City Council. We can draw examples from legislation, things that have happened, but I don't think we should pull into that's unfortunately other forums in which
Just so, I mean, these sort of things can get fractious. Neil wants to make his political point, fair enough, and there's lots of forums we can do that. But can I just share an experience? And I'm not the only one with this experience. There's other people. Unfortunately, the bulk of the work in standards is about one councillor moaning about another councillor. It's almost like what we used to call many years ago twitting, you know, trying to catch people out. So this happens, and sometimes it escalates and it has to be heard. So some of us have sat and had to listen to these things when they come forward. And you might have different people from different groups. And we have to take a view, and that view can't possibly be swayed by our politics, or if it were religion or anything, it just can't possibly be. So that is the sort of standard of this standards board. We have to be above that sort of thing. Now, if you are incensed by anything that's happening at a national level, then you've got a council who could bring that to, I expect there's other committees, but it could certainly bring it to the council as motions and all sorts of things. But in my view, and I'll always listen to other people, in my view, this is not the appropriate forum. It'd be tantamount to making a pre-decision on a planning issue. You have to go in with a clear mind, and in standards, we have to rise above the politics. If you can't do that, then I think it's no need to lose friends on it, but if you can't do that, I think the standard board is not for you, and you ought to look for another nominee.
I think I'm going to have to close this to a draw in a minute because it's getting slightly out of hand. And we're here just to discuss Worcester City Council. So one final comment. Thank you.
I think I'll remain here as long as I've got the confidence of others. Thank you very much. And heard the explanation of the principle that we're here only to talk about local issues. But that is also not true, because we always talk about national issues in full council. Leave it there.
If we go back to the recommendation, is everyone content that we take this forward? And okay, and please, nothing else. Do the meeting. Thank you all.